The Ain't No Fang podcast. From Arizona Sports, Ain't No Fang.
Welcome back into Ain't No Fang, Arizona Sports Diamondbacks podcast, coming to you on Halloween morning. So happy Halloween to everybody out there. I'm Alex Weiner, and joining me is the very scary Steve Zinsmeister, pre- and post-game show host for the Diamondbacks. Steve, what are you going as Halloween?
So my wife is going to be Alan from The Hangover, and our 6-month-old daughter, who is literally 6 months tomorrow, she's going to be Carlos, the baby. And so I guess I'm kind of playing the Bradley Cooper role. There's not much that went into the costume, to be honest with you. I think I'm probably going to wear a leather jacket or something, and I don't know. I'm not really sure what my portion of that is, but it should be a fun one nonetheless.
Yeah, if you lose a tooth between now and when you guys dress up, then that'll make things a little bit easier for making the costume work. You can just go as it helps.
Yeah, just need a little Sharpie on the big one, and yeah, we'll be all set.
Oh, that sounds awful. That just sounds awful. All right, so took a couple of weeks off. Obviously, the Diamondbacks, it's kind of the slow season in terms of the playoffs are happening, and so free agency and trades and all that kind of stuff doesn't start until after the World Series has ended. But now that we are at a point here where we are entering November, the World Series might be over tonight. It might be over this weekend. We'll see what goes on with the Dodgers and Blue Jays. But because of that, let's kind of take stock on where we are and what's kind of happened next for the Diamondbacks, and a couple of I think, interesting pieces of note for the Diamondbacks over the past 4 weeks or so. And I think we're going to dive into one in particular a little bit deeper, and that is the potential for Jordan Lawlar to be a center fielder where he's getting some reps in winter ball. But first and foremost, just to kind of set up where we are, the offseason calendar for Major League Baseball, it's as soon as the World Series is over, one day after it, free agents officially become free agents and they can start negotiating with their own teams. The trade market is officially open. Not a ton usually happens at this point, but then 5 days after, there's going to be a lot of cleaning up to do, because that's when free agency starts in terms of players being able to negotiate with other teams. Qualifying offers have to be distributed, and teams are going to have to put their players who are on the 60-day IL back on the active roster. And so the Diamondbacks are a team that they have 9 guys on the 60-day injured list, and they do not have 9 spots. So there's going to be some decisions in terms of, who gets cut and who stays on for the time being. And then we kind of move on from there. And then the next order of business would be kind of like award season. And then we'll eventually get into the GM meetings in a couple of weeks. But with all of that said, the Diamondback season ended 1 month ago. So, Steve, now that you've had 1 month to, be in the cave and ponder and kind of go over what had happened in the 2025 season for the Diamondbacks, was there anything you kind of realized, or any epiphanies you've had about what we watched in 2025 with this team that kind of stands out with you?
Well, I think where I stand now is actually pretty similar to how I felt in that last couple of weeks of the season, where the Diamondbacks were playing meaningful baseball games with, 3 games left to go in the season. And I guess the best way to summarize that is it's incredibly remarkable given the massive pivot that they decided to take at the trade deadline. I mean, like you were mentioning, guys who are going to become free agents either, in the next 48 hours or 72 hours, whatever it ends up being. That list was enormous during the course of the season. We knew the fire that the Diamondbacks were playing with by having so many guys on the last year of their contracts, whether it was Merrill Kelly or Gino Suarez or trading for Josh Naylor, knowing he was at the end. But because of the big pivot at the trade deadline and how many guys they ended up moving, that list is now just down to 3 people who potentially could leave in free agency, in Zach Gallen, James McCann, and Jalen Beeks. So it's interesting for me to look back at it, because I do have this huge appreciation for the way that the team played, for the effort that they showed in August and September, regardless of the decisions that were made by the front office. And I think everybody can agree with that we saw much better baseball after those decisions were made. And that's how I'll choose to reflect on 2025. I know it's kind of only focusing on the latter part and not as much on the first 3 to 4 months of the season, which certainly have their own storylines we could go over. But I'm choosing to reflect mostly upon what we saw in those last 2 months, because I think that matters a lot more heading into 2026, because that version of the Diamondbacks probably looks a lot more similar to what we're going to see than what we had the first 3 or 4 months of 2025.
Yeah, that's my biggest thing, right? Is that the 2025 season just has such a huge impact on the 2026 season because of the style of play, like you mentioned, but also because, there's so many guys who got hurt in 2025 that aren't going to be ready for opening day in 2026. And that also frames what we look for this offseason. The rotation is going to be a huge point of emphasis this offseason, partly because Zach Allen's a free agent, but also because Corbin Burns is not going to be ready until midway through the season, hopefully. The bullpen is going to be a huge point because they don't have Justin Martinez or AJ Puck to start next season. Lourdes Gurriel Jr. goes down. What does the outfield look like around Corbin Carroll? We'll get to more of that. And first base, because it's not like Tyler Locklear took the bull by the horns in his opportunities playing first, but he got hurt at the end of the year, and he's somebody who's probably not going to be ready for opening day either. So it's like, okay, they need first base help, they need some outfield help, they need some rotation help, they need bullpen help. So there's a lot more holes to the roster than we looked at going into last season, and part of that is, guys leaving free agency, but also part of that is just the ramifications of these long-term injuries we saw. So because of that and framing that, before we kind of get into more specifics on topics that we wanted to talk about, I'm going to hit you with the overarching, what do you think is the biggest need positionally for the Diamondbacks this offseason to address?
It has to start with the starting rotation, where right now you only know 60% of a 5-man rotation in Ryan Nelson, Brandon Pfaadt, and Eduardo Rodriguez in no particular order there. And 2 of those guys had troublesome 2025s, I would say, for Pfaadt and for Erod, just kind of slower starts. There was a stretch there where Erod won 9 out of 10 starts, which is great. So I do feel that there was at least a little momentum toward the end. And, Pfaadt was going through a lot of changes during the year, adding a cutter to his mix, trying to figure that out. James McCann was a big part of that growth process for him. So hopefully he can use that as kind of a sounding board going into 26 and find more success with his pitches moving east-west. So, Ryan Nelson is essentially going to be the ace of your starting rotation. He goes from being not even in the starting rotation at the beginning of 2025 to being at the top. And I'm interested to see how he handles that, not just from a pitching standpoint, but from a leadership standpoint and from a, mentality standpoint. But Nelly's certainly up for that challenge. He's gotten better each and every year, but that's still only 3 guys. And, last spring, which now seems like forever ago, but really wasn't all that long ago, the Diamondbacks had 7 major league quality starting pitchers. And we talked, how much did we talk, Alex, at the time about what are you going to do with this guy? What are you going to do with the,
What's
the
Jordan
surplus?
Montgomery's role going to be, Steve? What is he going to do for this team?
What are we going to do? And the front office kept telling us, let's let it all play out. You never finish spring with 7 guys, blah, blah, blah. And they were right. And so to go in right now with only 3 starting pitchers, at least from last year's rotation, that's a bit of a red flag. I mean, obviously they're going to address it. So it's not like they're going to go into spring training with 3 starting pitchers. But it's just a matter of who that's going to be and how they go about doing that. Do you spend the money in free agency, which we know can cost a pretty penny? Is it going to be via trade, which is going to deplete from, part of the farm system? Or is it internal hires as well? And who could that be? So there are some interesting questions surrounding the starting rotation. And I think a large portion of the news cycle for the Diamondbacks in the offseason will likely be starting pitchers.
I think all of the above is the answer to that. Will they explore the trade market for starters? Will they sign somebody? Will they, look at who they have internally? I think all of the above, right? I mean, because if we're filling it out right now with Pfaadt, Nelson, and Rodriguez, and then you try to find a 4 and a 5, I mean, probably Christian Mena and Cole Drake, maybe, or maybe Bryce Jarvis, or I don't know. Like, they have a handful of guys who are kind of getting close. Like, Mena was going to be a bigger part in the major league team, it seemed like, last year before he got injured. Cole Drake comes over from the Merrill Kelly trade, and got to AAA, kind of getting close. Dylan Ray, Spencer Geesting, like, they have a handful of guys they can try out there. But yeah, I would be surprised if they're not 2 reinforcements coming in, and maybe one's for in trade, maybe one's a free agent, maybe both come one way or another. Who knows? But I kind of, that's a good way, I think, to frame it in terms of what they need. It all starts with starting pitching. You can kind of figure out the rest, but there's obviously going to be some moves made in other positions as well. So With that said, I think the most interesting development that we've gotten in terms of Diamondbacks news over the past couple of weeks has been the fact that Jordan Lawlar is trying his luck playing center field in the Dominican Winter League for Tigres del Licey. So he's only been 2 games so far, so it's like, oh, how has he looked in center field? He barely started. Plus, they've had, obviously, a lot of weather that has contributed to postponements, and so they just haven't played a ton of games over there yet. He's played 2 games. But the fact that they're throwing him into the fire, playing, games in, a competitive environment with, loud crowds and games against, players who are on major league teams, on the opposing dugout, that's an interesting step to give a guy that he had never played in the outfield, since he got drafted by the Diamondbacks in the 2021 draft, which seems like forever ago as well at this point. But came up as a shortstop. It's been a shortstop, a third baseman, and a little bit second base too so far. What do you think throwing him in the outfield potentially unlocks for the Diamondbacks? Why do you think they do this?
Well, first of all, it's a roadblock that is of their own doing, and it's not a bad thing. It's the fact that Geraldo Perdomo has erupted into the star caliber player that he is. Not that I thought Lawlar was going to take his job as the starting shortstop, but I think that, there were definitely it was fair to compare the upsides of the 2 players. And now that we see that the upside of Geraldo Perdomo is literally the most valuable player in the National League outside of Shohei Ohtani, by WAR at least. So, yeah, he's not going anywhere. He played 161 games at shortstop this season, started 160 of them. So there's a roadblock at the position that Lawlar played most often. Second base doesn't seem to be a place that the organization wants Lawlar to play. And Ketel Marte is still the best second baseman in the league overall, by my estimation.
Yeah.
So there's really no spot for Lawlar in the middle infield, which is where his athleticism really shines. Third base felt like it was the natural fit. Gino was going to be a free agent at the end of the year, whether they traded him or not. And that I think the organization just assumed Lawlar would slide right into that position and be a third baseman moving forward. And defensively, they ran into a situation where Blaze Alexander was playing really well at the hot corner, and Lawlar, unfortunately, did not at the end. He had 4 errors over the course of back-to-back starts in September. And that was a time when they all of a sudden had winning expectations heaped back on their shoulders, and they were trying to fight for a wild card. So they made the understandable decision to go with the hot hand and Blaze Alexander. So to your question about what does this unlock? Well, it's really about what it unlocks for Lawlar, not as much the team, in my opinion, because the team has holes in the outfield. Whether that's center field and, he runs some sort of platoon with a guy like Alek Thomas, where Thomas faces righties and Lawlar faces lefties. I think that does a bit of a disservice to Lawlar, because eventually I think he is going to have to start facing right-handed pitching if you want to unlock that full potential that he has at the plate, which is, frankly, the best hitter in AAA last year. So could he be a fit in left field long term, like while Lourdes Gurriel Jr. is recovering from his ACL tear? That's a possibility as well. The Diamondbacks could really use a high upside right-handed hitter, and that certainly could be Jordan Lawlar. And so I think right now this is just reps for him and giving him an opportunity now as opposed to waiting until spring training and getting him, a couple of innings here and there. They're going to try to give him 9 innings as many times as they can in the winter ball and then see where things lie in spring. So I like this. I had a Diamondbacks coach tell me in the middle of this season, I think it was after his first call-up and before his second, and that coach told me that they could see Lawlar as an outfielder long term. So that's a bit forward thinking, I suppose. But I think it had less to do with him specifically or even the team, and really more just like his body type, his range and athleticism, I think would play really well out there. And the throwing errors were the issue at the end at third base. And so he wouldn't have to worry about that as much in the outfield as well. I'm really interested. I wish I could watch some of these games right now, but I am looking forward to spring training where we're probably going to see more of Lawlar in the outfield.
Yeah, I would think so, right? Because a lot there. I think first part is just because Lawlar had some miscues at third base, it doesn't mean he would be doomed there. I think that's important to set up, right? What this does is it gives you options. It gives you answers to different questions you're going to ask yourself as a team going into spring training. Because we also saw Blaze Alexander play the outfield, and his athleticism certainly popped out there. He's got a great arm, but Blaze has proved himself as a pretty valuable third baseman down the stretch of the season. His arm plays really, really well at third base. He's, athletic and has, kind of the reaction times in order to make those quick plays at the hot corner. So I think, from a defensive perspective, having him there in the range that he brings, I think there are a lot of benefits to keeping Blaze Alexander at third base. Now with Lawlar, like you mentioned, this is a guy who has speed to burn, right? He's a 20-plus stolen base guy in the minor leagues last couple of years. I think he stole 39 bases in 2024. Excuse me, in 2023, because in 2024 he was hurt. And he stole 20 bases and limited playing time in AAA last year. So he's got a ton of speed. It's just about keeping him healthy that's been the main problem with him. And then since he came up, you mentioned we saw some hiccups in the infield. We saw tons of hiccups in the infield with Blaze Alexander when he first came up, right, in 2024. It became disastrous to the point where they had Kevin Newman basically take over as the everyday starting shortstop with Blaze as a backup because he wasn't trusted to play the position. And now look where Blaze is at defensively at third base. Just because Lawlar had some hiccups as a rookie doesn't mean he can't be a guy who becomes a plus defensive player in the infield. But there are no guarantees. And because of the way the roster is constructed, I also agree with you that it's super kind of fascinating to see whether or not he can stick in the outfield, because that's an obvious position of need. Corbin Carroll, pencil him in as the starting right fielder for next season, unless they decide to move him to center or they make some other moves that changes the outlook of the roster, what have you. But he's going to take one of the three. And Gurriel tore his ACL in September. That's not an easy recovery to be back in 6 months, right? I mean, it's going to take most of next season to get him back, if he comes back at all. And then you have this group of Alec Thomas and Jake McCarthy and Tim Tawa and Jorge Barosa. And maybe you get some more reinforcements from, the minor leagues. Do we see Christian Robinson this year? Do we see AJ Vukovic this year? Do we see Tommy Troy as a center fielder potentially, where they tried him out too? So there is an opportunity for Lawlar, if he can be a respectable center fielder, to solve a lot of problems for them. I mean, even to your point, you don't want to have him just be a platoon guy, because he's supposed to be a bigger part of your future than that. But that might be a way to kind of get him, semi-regular at-bats, and then try to find a rhythm for him. And if he gets hot, then you can kind of expand it a little bit. What did you make of how he ended the season, right? Because offensively, he goes on that huge 0-for streak to start it. Even dating back to 2023, he had this huge 0-for streak. And then I thought he hit pretty well in September. What did you make of how he finished the season?
I thought he hit really well. I mean, while those defensive things were happening in the backdrop, I thought he took advantage of his opportunities down the stretch and made some really good adjustments. I know that, this hitting staff, the coaching staff, they did a really good job with Jordan, and he seemed to be having a lot of fun. Jordan is a great guy. A lot of these guys are good dudes, but there's certainly a tough aspect to coming up to the major league level and going, what was it, over 30 or over 31, whatever it was, the first time around.
31 this year, and then it was over 36 dating back to 2023.
That's a tough thing to deal with mentally. And so for him to come back the second time around and not have the stability of I play X position, I thought he did pretty well with the at-bats that he was given. I mean, he's got huge upside. I was talking with Nash Walker, the voice of the Reno Aces, during the season when Lawlar got called up, and I was like, tell me more about, what he's looked like in Reno. And he goes, frankly, he's too good. He's too good for Reno. And I think that's where we're at right now is Lawlar is too good for AAA. They're not going to learn anything by stashing him there again, if that, was an option. I think they have to find a spot for him to play pretty much every day, or at least regularly, because he was victim of the situation, and it wasn't his fault, and it wasn't really their fault either. They thought the first time they called him up that they were going to be able to find him those at-bats by moving him around and giving guys days off, and it just didn't work out that way.
Turns out you want Perdomo and Suarez in the lineup as much as you can when they're humming the way that they were humming.
And that was a good decision.
Yeah.
And, it hits me too that Lawlar was a part of it in the later part of the season when the team was at its best. I think that says a lot too about Jordan, and like he was contributing to a team that was playing pretty well at the end. So I hope he takes that and runs with it, not just in winter ball, but as we get into 2026, because he's going to have an opportunity in front of him. I don't know which position it's going to be at. It still feels like they want it to be in the outfield, whether it's center or maybe even left, like we talked about, but he's going to have a place on this team at the major league level. I just don't know exactly what it looks like yet. I don't think they know exactly what it looks like yet, but he's going to have a chance to stand out again.
Yeah, I think so. Certainly some hiccups for him at this point, but it's a guy who really is going to have to pop for them if the Diamondbacks want to hit a certain ceiling that they have for themselves next year, even before we get into what they do with the rotation, what they do here, what they do there. I mean, this is a guy who, if he does become like a core player for them, that just solves so many problems for them when it comes to like the future outlook of what this lineup and defense can look like. Speaking of defense, Corbin Carroll is up for a Gold Glove. It would be the first of his career. This is the first time he's a finalist. He was named a finalist a few weeks ago, but now we're coming up on when the announcements are coming. It's going to be November 2nd. That's when it's going to drop. He's the only Diamondback who got nominated for a Gold Glove this year after they had 5 in 2024, which kind of tells you a pretty good story about the defensive decline that the team experienced, although it did get better in the second half of the season. So Corbin Carroll's going up against Sal Frelick, who won the Gold Glove last year of the Milwaukee Brewers, and Fernando Tatis, who won the Gold Glove in 2023 for the San Diego Padres. It's pretty stacked. It's a stacked group, but Carroll very obviously made strides defensively this year. So I wanted to ask you, just as somebody who, like me, watched him every single day out there, what did you make of what Corbin Carroll was able to kind of turn himself into as a defender?
He took his arm and turned it into his best weapon in the outfield. I mean, really, the calling card for Corbin Carroll has always been his speed, right? And we know that because he leads the league in triples every year. But when you put that in the outfield, whether it's center field, right or left, doesn't matter. When you have wheels like Corbin, you're going to have crazy range. And he did. He led all of right fielders in the National League in range in those defensive metrics, which is not surprising. However, he's only slightly more rangy than a guy like Fernando Tatis Jr., who is only a little bit better than Sal Frelick. So that kind of, evens out the race a little bit. The arm helped a lot. He led, I think he had 9 assists from the outfield this season, which I think Tatis only had 5, if I remember, although he started a handful of double plays, which was pretty impressive. Maybe Tatis does have a bit of an advantage, in that his size allows him to play the ball at the wall a little bit more often. He robs more home runs, which are kind of like Heisman moments, so to speak, for Gold Glove winners. But the fact that, like you mentioned, that Frelick and Tatis have both won Gold Gloves in the last 2 years, that tells me that Corbin Carroll is the most improved of this group. And that almost means more to me than actually winning the award. Don't get me wrong. I think he's got a great argument. I think he could win the award. But even if he doesn't, the fact that he is a top 3 right fielder in the National League right now is a testament to his growth, because I think that arm strength really improved. He's throwing through cutoffs better than he ever has before. I know that was a huge emphasis that I talked with Dave McKay, the outfielders coach, about. They brought in a pitching coach last year to help Corbin develop the throwing motion, and it worked out for him. I mean, we saw it on display in the biggest series of the year, really, against the Dodgers there at home at the end of September, where he throws out a runner in the top of the 10th and giving them an opportunity in the bottom of the 10th. So I think that he's got a good chance. I think he leads those 3 guys, and I think it's outs above average, but defensive runs saved, it's kind of flipped, and Tatis carries the argument. I don't know who's going to win the award, frankly, but the fact that he is in that mix again, I think that's a real testament to Corbin and the work ethic that he put in defensively for a guy who's already one of the most versatile offensive players in baseball. Yeah,
he put together an unbelievable offensive year, and the fact that it's just such a well-rounded season for him, you're right, it bodes well for the future of Corbin Carroll in this Diamondbacks outfield. To give you those numbers, tied a career high 10 outs above average, 9 of which came in right field, that's the range statistic. And defensive runs saved, he had 8 of them, which is also a career high. That's kind of more all-encompassing range, errors, arm strength, all that kind of stuff. His arm strength went up from 82.6 miles per hour in 2024 to 86.2 miles per hour in 2025. So nearly 4 miles per hour on his throws. It's, he still doesn't have Tatis's arm. Tatis is the best arm. And you mentioned Corbin had 9 assists, Frelick had 10, and Tatis had 5, but guys aren't really testing Tatis quite as often. But at the same time, you kind of look at the outfields they all play in. Playing right field every single day at Chase Field is a little bit different than playing right field every single day at Petco Park. It's a lot deeper. You have to cover a lot more range. And that's where Corbin Carroll really shines. And so there's a good argument, I think, for all three of them. Which makes this a really fascinating debate. I do think there is a good argument for Corbin to win his first Gold Glove, but I wouldn't be shocked if it's either one of Frelick or Tatis. But yeah, I do think even though it was overall a very disappointing defensive season from the Diamondbacks as a team, this is a really strong development that we've seen here. And, if we get the defense that we saw in the second half, if Gabby Moreno stays healthy, if, Perdomo, who was amazing this season, but was critical of himself when it comes to his defense, if he takes some steps forward, Blaze Alexander at third, we'll see what happens at first base and some of the corners. But I think there's potential here for this to be a better defensive team. That's obviously going to be a focus with their offseason agenda. But yeah, so I don't know if he was going to win the Gold Glove. It comes out again on November 2nd, but it certainly seems like he has a puncher's chance in it. So we'll see what happens there. Steve, oh, yes.
I was just going to throw in, too, I read Tatis had 60 more putouts than the next guy, which might have been Corbin Carroll. I can't remember. That's more, it's not like he chose to have more putouts, right? That's just kind of the situations he was put in. But I found that kind of fascinating too, that Tatis had that many more opportunities than other guys. I'm not trying to build a case for Tatis. Like you said, any of these three guys has a really good resume for winning the award. But again, I'll reiterate the fact that Corbin Carroll is in a group with those guys. It's pretty cool that we can say that a 5-tool player like Corbin Carroll found a way to improve upon one of those tools in the tool belt that he wasn't bad at. He just had room for growth.
Yeah.
And how cool is it that heading into 26, that's a strength rather than something to work on?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, this is the part of the show that's going to be outdated relatively quickly, but whatever. What did you make of the Blue Jays just coming back and really dominating the last 2 games after that classic 18-inning marathon ends in heartbreak for them? For them to just come back, they were non-competitive games by the end of these games.
Yeah, it's hard to pinpoint, exactly how they were able to accomplish that. I've seen, people make the case that because the Blue Jays are a younger team and the Dodgers are older veterans, that they didn't recover from the, 18-inning game as easily as the Blue Jays did. But I think a lot of it goes back to desperation. Frankly, the Blue Jays as an organization, they have not had this moment in 30 years, more than 30 years, basically my entire lifetime. The last time they did this was 93. I was 1 year old.
Yeah.
I think that does play a factor here. I think the fact that Vladimir Guerrero Jr. and his story arc and representing Canada, the country in which he was born, is so fascinating to me because his dad played in Montreal and those storylines. Getting the starting pitching that the Blue Jays have gotten from guys who weren't even on the team for 95% of the year. I always said that this World Series was going to come down to who got the better performances from their starting pitching. And frankly, I thought that would be the Dodgers. Just with the way that they had pitched throughout the postseason. And obviously they've got a lot of good players in their lineup as well. But right now they're kind of leaning on Ohtani, which normally would be fine and would be plenty. But right now the Blue Jays just seem to have the more cohesive vision offensively. They're more persistent.
Yeah.
And they're pestering the Dodgers right now. And even some of these great pitchers in the Dodgers rotation are feeling the brunt of it. And so I'm so glad that the Blue Jays have this opportunity. But I think, tonight they could put it away. Like you said, this could be completely outdated in the next couple of hours. But then again, if we got a Game 7, I wouldn't hate that either. But I'm just really glad that the Blue Jays didn't roll over to a team that most people perceived as the better squad. And frankly, the Blue Jays have been right there in terms of offering money to, they were the other team that Ohtani was considering by all accounts. And so I think they're kind of crushing that narrative as well, which is good to see.
This is why we have you on, right? Because even though the World Series might be over by the time a lot of people listen to this, all that analysis is very apt, and I think that stands up even if we know who's the World Series champion tonight or not. Another thing this World Series is teaching us is we also think about the Diamondbacks going forward. Defense matters. Defense matters a lot, and the Blue Jays have been the more sound, athletic team over the last couple of games and has made a big difference. I think just the Blue Jays are also better than people expected, or better than people had perceived, because nobody really saw them coming. They were such a disappointment last year, and it was like, all right, is this Blue Jays thing really going to happen at all with Vladimir Guerrero and this kind of core? And even banged up, it's happening right now. So we'll see. It's Yoshinobu Yamamoto versus Kevin Gausman in Game 6, and then of course it's like the all hands on deck for Game 7. I'm rooting for Game 7 just because Game 7s are awesome, but it would be really cool for a franchise that hasn't won in a long time, who are huge underdogs, to get one over a team that was considered invincible. I think that's just, that's baseball, right? Like, you can do everything you can from a money perspective. Not like the Blue Jays are cheap. They're an expensive team too, but not the Dodgers. But at the end of the day, it's just like who comes together at the right moment. So, I mean, it's just a beautiful sport in that regard.
Well, and the thing about the Blue Jays too that I love is they're figuring it out on the fly. Like, obviously, I kind of alluded to Trey Savage, who, wasn't really a part of this team throughout most of the season, and now is suddenly their best pitcher, maybe their best player outside of Vlad. But also, too, you look at the way that they've pieced together some other things. Bo Bichette decides, I'm playing in the World Series, regardless of injury, regardless of the fact that there's a better player at his position. He's like, I don't care. I'll play second base if that's what it takes. We're going to win this championship. It's all hands on deck, like you said. And to watch guys like Addison Barger play such a significant role, which kind of hurts because it gives me flashbacks to Toronto versus the Diamondbacks this season. But watching them play is fascinating because the Dodgers, they know who they are and they know what they do. And we all know that. And they're going to look relatively the same every day. The Blue Jays, they're just figuring it out on the fly, and it seems to be working for them. And so, I don't know, there's some magic there for Toronto right now. And I realize I say this, and in 24 hours, the Dodgers could be world champions. So take it with a grain of salt.
In 48 hours, we'll see.
Right.
It seems like George Springer is going to be back in the lineup today, so that's another big deal.
Figure it out. Figure it out on the fly.
It's part of that equation, right? It's guys gutting it out. This is the time of year. You have to all hands on deck. All right.
Absolutely.
That is where we will leave you. Again, once the World Series is over, then that's the start of the offseason and things can start flying around. And we will definitely have more content breaking down some ideas and free agency and trades and what happens in the first week and all that jazz, who gets cut, that kind of thing. So keep it locked in on Arizona Sports. Thank you so much to Steve Zinsmeister, pre- and post-game show host for the Diamondbacks. Again, my friend, thank you for coming on. And have a great Halloween, everybody.